everybody, and welcome to another edition of This Week in Cleantech, your favorite 15-minute roundup with some of the biggest stories in climate and energy each week. We're recording this one for Friday, May 29th, 2026. We do have a special guest in waiting, Robison, you can call me Rob Meyer from Heatmap News, joining us shortly. I'm Factor This content director, Paul Gerke. Man. I have effectively cracked up my co-host, Cleantech commentator Mike Casey from Tigercomm before the show, making me feel good. Like I still got the fastball, Mike. Like maybe I could still pursue this this postponed career of stand-up comedy that I've been toying around with. It makes me feel good to make you laugh. So
what viewers and listeners sometimes get a hint of is that Brian Mendez is a master of court intrigue. So he's our chef. He wants to be a star chef, and he's always trying to upstage us by getting us to crack up right before he rolls tape. But on this week, Paul Gerke, my friend and co-host, dropped the mega burn on Brian right before we rolled. And
you put a ball on a tee and I'll swing at it, man.
Oh my God. I'm wiping my eyes. That was so funny. All right. Well, first off.
Well, can't share those jokes with you. Let's talk about the show. All right, moving on.
So first off, I want to give a shout to Joseph Orgeron. He is not only executive director of Restore or Retreat, he's also the co-founder of Second Wind Marine, and he's a Louisiana state rep. He wrote to me on LinkedIn. He said,
3 jobs in this economy. Unreal.
He loves the show and catches every episode. Joseph, thanks for reaching out, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd really love to hear from you guys. If you want to shout out on the show or you've got an opinion to share, 2 cents to throw at us, you can email us, twictwick@tigercomm, that's with 2 M's.us. Mike, we've got 5 stories locked and loaded. What's the first one in the chamber?
All right. Politico, Liz Crampton. Representative Chip Roy loses runoff for Texas Attorney General to a MAGA challenger. Let's go to the story behind this story, Paul Gerke.
If you listen to this show, you might recall an E&E News story that we covered back in March about a solar-backed political action committee, a PAC, that spent more than $650,000 opposing Chip Roy in his campaign for Texas Attorney General. The messaging there saying Roy was not MAGA enough for Texas. This week, Chip Roy lost the primary to State Senator Mays Middleton after he was portrayed as insufficiently loyal to MAGA causes. Middleton convinced voters he was the best Republican to lead MAGA from outgoing Attorney General Ken Paxton, who just won the Texas State Senate primary. Mike, I'm sure you've got a lot of things to say about this.
No, let's just skip to the next story. No, I'm kidding. All right. So Roy has shoveled billions of dollars in corporate welfare at oil and gas companies while hating on renewables. But he could not overcome accusations that he betrayed his party by breaking with Trump over fiscal spending and in voting to certify Trump's 2020 election loss. When a solar-backed PAC chaired by Clean Choice's Tom Matzey threw its weight behind a race and the votes to back it up, it sent a message that even the Freedom Caucus incumbents like Roy aren't untouchable. Hat tip to Stephen Lacey, another awesome podcaster, for his interview on LinkedIn with Ripple co-founder Chris Larson and former Sierra Club executive director Mike Brune, who are involved with this PAC effort, on whether clean energy can build the same political strategy that took down Chip Roy. I got to say, the bedwetting underneath Stephen Lacey's post was just remarkable. A bunch of people who are clearly taking advantage of legalized psychedelics, living in a parallel universe, complaining about this. Paul, let's go to story number 2.
Let's do it. Let's get a little clean energy with our politics. Second story this week from Brad Plumer at the New York Times. It's titled, U.S. aims to give Cold War plutonium to startups for nuclear fuel. They're just going to load it into Santa's sleigh and have him drop it off, Mike?
So the administration is moving forward with a plan to provide plutonium from old dismantled nuclear warheads to 5 companies, including California-based Oklo, that want to convert the dangerous material into fuel for nuclear plants. Okay. Reasonable idea on its face. If finalized, this would be the first time the U.S. government made weapons-grade plutonium available to private companies. The DOE has 50-plus tons of surplus plutonium left over from nuclear weapons programs, and the agency has previously planned to dilute and bury it, but some nuclear startups argue the U.S. Is currently unable to make enough conventional fuel from uranium to supply nuclear plants. Harvesting old plutonium stockpiles would be a good short-term solution. I will add, if handled competently. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, that's an important caveat. And this is a bit outside of my realm of understanding, but I do have some basic thoughts from the piece. One is the first that you mentioned, that we're talking about the kind of stuff that you use to build nuclear weapons. So there needs to be some bumpers around it, some safeguards, if you will. We can't just be handing out plutonium to companies that say they're interested. Yeah, like there has to be some due diligence and process there. And there are some that argue that the efforts to turn it into fuel are not all that easy. There's some real technical challenges. It gets really expensive. So maybe it is better to just bury the stuff in the ground. But I say all that to say this: the Trump administration has a goal of quadrupling the size of the U.S. nuclear fleet by 2050. There's some real traction in that space. I feel like there's some real ebb and flow. Nuclear always feels 7 to 10 years away. But if we're to believe that that's actually what they're intent on doing, this might need to be considered as one of those options to get there. Mike, story 3.
Okay, Economist. China's world-beating solar industry is in turmoil. Paul Gerke, are you in turmoil?
Not at the moment. It was a bit of turmoil this morning when my dog decided to fight a mama deer. He lost, by the way. Little Theo's going to be okay, but it was not a fight that he should ever choose to pick again.
Yikes.
Anyway, I digress. China makes about 80% of the world's solar panels. Actually, I thought it was more than that. It's only 80 now. Southeast Asia's doing a fair amount of the production, I assume. Anyway, it's driving the growth that led renewables to generate more electricity than coal globally last year. That's a big deal. It's the first time that's happened. But the country's solar industry out in China is having some troubles. Domestic demand is falling for the first time in decades because they've got a lot of generation out there. Factories are pumping out so many panels that supply has outpaced demand. You can get them really, really cheap. And more markets abroad are taking protectionist measures and saying, hey, you can't just stockpile this stuff into our markets and more or less put the rest of our panel makers out of business. China's always been the main market for solar panels. And quite frankly, the grid hasn't been able to keep up because they've been able to build it out so fast. When solar output exceeds what the grid can handle, that surplus has nowhere to go, called curtailment. In January and February, that came to about 9% of China's total solar generation wasted. That's up 6% from the year before, which makes it hard to justify putting more solar onto the grid unless China's also storing that solar power with batteries or moving it long distances to where it might be needed. Mike, they are way ahead of where we are with all this stuff. Yeah. What would we do with a glut of generation supply that could get interconnected?
Talk about trading up on your problem set.
No kidding.
So China's solar companies are also dealing with a glut of supply. They're able to produce 1,000 gigawatts of solar capacity a year. Only 600 gigawatts were installed worldwide in 2025.
Wild. That's wild.
Yeah, that's a serious math challenge.
It's a lot.
So the installations in China could fall between 24 and 43% from last year, enough to cause a drop in global demand for the first time in 2 decades, per Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Manufacturers call for self-discipline and try to agree on production quotas and price floors. On the government side, feed-in tariffs and subsidies have been pulled back, but it's still a rough outlook for China. More than 40 Chinese solar firms have either gone bankrupt, been acquired, or been delisted from stock exchanges since 2024, and a third of the workforce from 5 of their biggest firms have been laid off. 2 things could revive this industry. 1, trade barriers falling, exports could surge. 2, new solar tech could become more efficient and cheaper, but only if firms survive long enough to see it. We will see what happens.
Yeah, I expect more consolidation, Mike, because to be frank, the PFE stuff, the foreign entities of concern, the FIAC stuff that's really starting to percolate within the clean energy space, now that those old vintage of tax credits have been cleared out and these projects are subject to figuring out not only who's producing the stuff, but who owns these companies all the way up. I think as that shell game changes and ownership changes and stuff moves around, we're going to see further consolidation in the Chinese solar market, because there has to be, or else bad stuff. Anyway, story 4. Our 4th story this week. Emily Forgash, Jennifer A. Dluy, and Mark Chediak, our friend at Bloomberg. It's titled, Wind Permit Stall is Threatening $50 billion in U.S. Developments. You don't say. Putting the brakes on an entire industry is doing some economic harm.
Dude, it's friends plural, because Jennifer Dluy was one of the early guests on our show. So just...
Oh, she's your friend. She doesn't like me at all. No, I'm just kidding. I have no idea.
All right. About $50 billion in wind investments and 150,000 jobs are in jeopardy by the Trump administration's halt to approvals for new onshore projects, according to American Clean Power. which is going to host the Clean Power Show next week in Houston. The Pentagon has stalled roughly 130 proposed wind projects, stopping investments that could power 20 million American homes because Americans don't want lower electricity prices, Paul.
That was sarcasm. That was sarcasm, everybody.
Yeah. Texas has a quarter of these projects worth about $11 billion. So the new onshore wind projects are unable to move forward because the Department of Defense has stopped sending reviews to the Federal Aviation Administration, which must sign off before any project can proceed. The Defense Department reviews wind farms to make sure they don't interfere with military operations, but an industry group alleged it has halted all projects, even those with no military concerns. Paul, your thoughts?
Yeah, this is what happens when I don't check my email for a couple of days. It's basically just a larger, more governmentally backed up version of that, where it's like, well, we're just going to stop checking it at that point, and that's where everything's going to stall out. Trump officials have criticized both wind and solar power. They've called them ugly and subsidy dependable and unreliable and on down the line. But as we deal with this surging electricity demand driven by AI, electrification, air conditioning, etc., the administration has obviously shown some flexibility on projects, particularly with solar, but they've still been fighting wind tooth and nail. You remember all of the lawsuits, the offshore projects that got rejected. Wind power has got a long way to go. Offshore might be sunk in the U.S. for all intents and purposes, which we've talked a lot on the show. But it looks like the onshore projects are having their own problems, even in places that can typically get those projects online, like Texas, like you mentioned, Mike. A lot to this, but I don't want to keep our guest waiting any longer.
Yeah. Our last story is with Rob Meyer from Heatmap News. We wanted him on the show for a long time, and he is on, and we are fired up.
Woo!
Particularly,
second woo.
Particularly because his story, exclusive local opposition to data centers explodes in 2026. We are days away from clean power, where a lot of developers who are getting into data centers are going to be gathering in Houston. So we thought this would be super timely to have him on. Hey, Rob, thanks for coming on. Really glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
All right. So we want people to really take in this resource, particularly if you're on planes flying out to Houston the next several days. Give them a preview of the big points that you gathered in this reporting.
And then a separate preview for people not on planes. No, I'm just kidding. You can do it all in one.
I always address our flying population separate. So this research came out of our exclusive research that we put together at Heatmap Pro. You know, Heatmap News, we're a newsroom that covers clean energy decarbonization, all that jazz. We also have a separate product called Heatmap Pro. And every so often we kind of pull back the curtain on what we're finding in our Heatmap Pro service that helps developers assess political risk. What we found is that, as many folks will know, but hopefully we can put some specificity to it, local opposition to data centers is surging. And so in Q1 of this year, there were 20 data centers that were canceled after facing some kind of local opposition. That might sound like a lot. It is. I'd say last in Q4 of 25, 12 data centers were canceled after facing some kind of opposition. In Q3 of 25, it was a little less than that. It was 11. And in Q2, it was less than 5 data centers were canceled. So we're watching the number of cancellations per quarter surge. And just to put some numbers on this, to put a final bow on this, maybe last year in all of 2025, there were 25 data centers that we found that were canceled after facing some kind of local opposition. So first of all, in Q1 of this year, there were 20. So we're almost about to break 2025's record just in Q1. We probably already have, just out of cancellations in April and May. And second of all, we're very, very close. We're just watching the opposition here surge. And I think we're watching opposition surge beyond the number of projects that are actually being planned. The other big number that came out in our reporting was that in Q1, there were 100 new permitting battles over data centers. And that was also significantly higher than the 78 or so, 75 that were in Q4 and the roughly 50 that were in Q3. And so if you think about Q3 of last year to Q1 of this year, we're watching the number of new fights that we see in the database. That's local opposition to data centers, not cancellations, but just fights overall has doubled since in just the past 6 months.
What are the primary drivers that you found in your reporting that are really the front runners for the chief problems people have with data centers and noise and resources, et cetera?
Yeah, so there's an interesting nuance here. So we track both why data centers are being fought and then why the reasons that municipalities or counties give when they're ultimately canceled after facing local opposition. And it's a little different. So the number one reason that people oppose data centers are, I think, exactly what you would guess. Their energy use, their local environmental impact, their water. It's kind of the classic trifecta, right? But the reason that most projects the reason that's given when projects get canceled is actually none of those three things. It's about noise. Noise is the number one reason that projects get canceled after facing some kind of local opposition. And we think that's telling us a number of things, but what I see that is that ultimately canceled projects were probably being built close to subdivisions or close to some kind of residential, and noise is almost like a proxy for trying to build too close to residential, in that, ultimately, yes, municipalities, residents may have issues with projects on water use, on energy use, on these kind of more nebulous environmental concerns, but it is ultimately trying to build close to some other land use, probably residential, that actually gets a project killed.
Also, gas turbines are noisy.
Yes, they are.
Pretty loud.
Yeah.
Rob, I want to, I want to test a statement and then ask a question. So I was speaking at Geronimo's executive summit several weeks ago, and we were on a panel about community engagement. It was supposed to be community engagement for renewable energy projects and data centers. And I said, I think that in 18 months, this panel is not possible anymore because data center development is becoming just a different kind of challenge, because it has a different benefit and disadvantage equation. It demands power, doesn't create it. It soaks up a ton of water. And I also think it's the baggage that the tech oligarchs are bringing. I mean, there's such a gap in this time of a challenged economy when people are paying $100 to fill up a truck versus having such a big mega yacht. You got to get the harbor to blow up the bridge so you can get your boat out. It's such a big gap. And I think that
which you're now selling. Yes.
It's like,
sounds great. Where can I blow the bridge up?
and I'm just wondering, do you see other factors driving it besides water, electricity, tech bro baggage, anything else? Like, I wonder about the fear about AI and what it'll do to civilizations and what it'll do to jobs. Do you see that in the mix at all?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess what I'd say, I agree with you. I mean, I think what I'd note here broadly is that, especially in kind of energy or clean tech circles, when we talk about data centers, we tend to see them as large electricity using resources. And then I think even come to them through a policy lens of like, these are big drivers of load growth. And in my book, load growth is usually good, especially if it's, attached to consumers who want to buy clean to service that demand, right? At the same time, there's this entirely separate policy discourse that's happening about AI and jobs and growth and alignment and automation and these apocalyptic fears around AI. And I will note basically that when we talk about even at the state level and the county level, when we talk about policy, there tends to be like data center policy, which is very reasonable and looks at protecting electricity consumers from costs and looks at local noise impacts and local water impacts. And then there's like AI policy, which is pretty spectral and talks about these big questions that we don't know how to answer yet about alignment and what ultimately AI will do to jobs and whether it's going to kill us all and whatever else. And so we talk about these are like two totally separate discourses, right? I don't think these are separate at the local level when people are actually opposing data centers. And I think people are worried. They hate data centers. They are able to build a coalition against them at the local level because of more practical concerns around water use or electricity rates or noise. I think the reason that they are singling out this type of industrial development is, first of all, just because there's a lot getting built, very high profile, but then because of their anger at tech overlords, at their concerns about AI, their feeling that AI is using the internet and then selling it back to us, fears around not fears, but anxieties around capitalism and anguish about capitalism, right? I think all of that is driving a good chunk of the pushback to data centers, as well as like these very classic like industrial development type concerns around noise and water use and local air pollution.
Paul, I could do this all day. You want to take last question, then go to Cleantecher of the week?
Yeah, Rob, I there's a lot to this here, and there's a lot of different, I was toying with where I wanted to take you on it, but I think, living in a place here in New Jersey where there's been a lot of pushback to some local data center development opportunities, let's call them. I just get the sense that the hyperscalers are just going to go somewhere else. Is that the sense that you're getting too? Is like, well, we'll just find another community and maybe we'll give them an extra $10 million and then we'll set up shop there? Or is there some limit and some effectiveness to this pushback that might actually change plans for some of these big folks?
Well, let me first say that where we do not see a single data center get canceled is Texas. Mm-hmm. I don't think there has been one data center canceled after local opposition in our data set in Texas. And that's not because they're less controversial in Texas per se, but there's more land there, right? The ERCOT's very easy to set up two-way contracts in. It's very easy to hook up something up to the grid. But I think it's also just because Texas, it's hard to oppose a local land use concern. It's hard to oppose local forms of development. They've made it more difficult in the state. I have like two thoughts here. First of all, as a fellow, I'm from New Jersey. I grew up there. So, Mercer County represent. And so I will note that I think it has been useful for kind of the whole country. And I think the Democratic Party kind of governance, for a form of industrial development to be happening in the mid-Atlantic states. I think normally we're used to the biggest stories in the economy happening either in the Southeast or in California, maybe some forms in the Sun Belt or residential in the Mountain West. It's been interesting to watch Governor of Pennsylvania, Governor of New Jersey, Governor of Maryland, Governor of Virginia have to figure out what the policy is going to be to govern a very new and exciting and disruptive and potentially tax receipts increasing form of economic development. I think that's been kind of a healthy exercise for those involved, whether or not it's going to stay that way. I think broadly, I do share this concern, I guess, or this kind of prediction that to the degree, look, there's a number of states where Maine was considering banning data centers, right? And it wound up not doing so because there's one site in Maine, there's one town in Maine that wants to get a data center, has power resources that are captive. And so the state was like, okay, we're going to let the town do it. I think generally, though, look, this form of development is going to go somewhere else if it's not welcomed. And I think it could follow a story that's kind of like fracking, where there were a number of different states that saw early fracking. There was interest in fracking in New York, for instance. It was banned here for reasons actually having to do with water. And ultimately, some states got fracking, some states didn't. Pennsylvania did, Texas did, right? The Midwest did, and those states, frankly, got the benefit of growth and got the benefit of higher energy prices. Now they also got a lot of carbon emissions and some local air pollution too. And that's kind of a trade-off they make. But I do think this is going to follow the contours of fracking, where it ultimately winds up in a different, it shifts the kinds of the country where it happens.
Rob, I'll note three things in closing. I'm talking from the data center capital of the world here in Northern Virginia. I will say that I think plus 70% of Virginians are opposed to data centers, so worth noting. And a public opinion researcher that I read recently said that in his life, he's never seen opposition to data centers form so fast across party lines on any issue. So I think this is a new world. It'll be interesting to me to see if what happens unfolds in the pattern of the past that you're talking about, or it's something new. So with that said, I think we got to go to our Cleantech of the week, Paul Gerke.
Yeah, we are over time, but time well spent. Appreciate your dropping by the show, Rob. Let's do the Cleantecher of the week. As Mike mentioned, this time around, it is Tom Sisto, CEO of XL Batteries. XL Batteries. Hey, you like long duration energy storage, Mike? How long do these batteries store energy for? 250 hours.
Damn.
There's got to be a use case for that somewhere, right?
Hell yeah.
XL Batteries, organic flow batteries, 250 hours. They run on non-toxic, non-flammable electrolytes, meaning they can be deployed in really population-dense areas without heavy permitting scrutiny that you might have to have for lithium-ion installations. Cool stuff, cool technology. Had no idea someone was doing a 250-hour battery. That is wild. Congrats, Tom Sisto, CEO of XL Batteries.
Yeah, man. We got to thank our wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, and Alex Peterson and Claire Quirin for helping gather these stories.
You didn't have to pause like that after you said terrific producer, as if you were considering saying his name. Brian's terrific. He's got an awesome mustache. Thanks for joining us.
There wasn't a note of hesitation in my mind.
I hope he makes the pause even longer in post. Thanks for checking out another episode of This Week in Clean Tech. One more shout out to Rob Meyer for joining this week's episode. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Go read it if you haven't already. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the show. Leave a little feedback. Share a story suggestion to the email address we mentioned at the top. You can read every article we discuss each week. They're in the links in the episode description and in the post where this lives on factorthis.com. Until next time, be good, people.
See you in Houston.